Hello and welcome to OS. I am here today with Bob of Speaker's Corner and Ben and Bob, who are both debaters at Speaker's Corner. I may as well just say, first of all, that neither of my two guests are Orthodox, just for all my Orthodox viewers. But that's okay, because there's reasons why I brought these two on, and you'll see why. So maybe Bob can just introduce himself, and then Ben can introduce himself, and I've got both their links to their channels in the description below. So go ahead, Bob.
Hi, peace with you guys. As the name suggests, I go to Speaker's Corner. It's one of the principal places that I do evangelism. I am pursuing a vocation in evangelism, which obviously involves a lot of apologetics. And for the moment, Speaker's Corner is one of the principal places that I do that. And a lot of people have encountered me through a channel called Soko Films. And I have my own channel, which I'm not even sure of the name of my own channel, to be honest. That's how bad I am. But I've got my own channel as well. But most people know me through Soko Films. And I currently do evangelism, particularly aimed at Muslims, but anyone else who sort of steps into the crosshairs. And I also do work with fellowships and churches, training them up and trying to get them to think about some of the issues connected to Islam, Christianity, and evangelism in general.
Yeah, sure. So as Lewis said, I go to Speaker's Corner just like Bob does. That's where I do my evangelism. The reason being is because when I first stumbled across Speaker's Corner, as everyone does, I'm sure you stumble across Speaker's Corner online on YouTube. And I saw this kind of really weird place where people were screaming at each other, and it was socially okay for some reason. And so I decided to attend one day. And then that's when I kind of got the experience of what's really going on there. You see this you have the Muslims over here, you have the Christians over here, and basically they're debating for souls, if you like. And I thought it would be a perfect place to attend, because it's the one place in the world pretty much you can say what you like to a certain degree and not be arrested, not be attacked physically without someone stepping in, basically. So I started attending there because I saw a need, because when I started watching Speaker's Corner, I believe Jay Smith was just on his way out. I saw some Soko Films videos, and then I met some of the guys from Soko, and I saw that actually, in terms of numbers, the Christians were far less than the Muslims. So I thought it would be a good idea to step in, fill the gap where the gap is, and come alongside Bob and Soko Films and the other Christians there and debate and evangelize and push back against some of the arguments that they make against the Christians at Speaker's Corner. And that tends to be what I really do. I tend to go around Speaker's Corner and I listen to the conversations. And when I hear, for example, Muslims pinning a Christian in a corner who doesn't really know the faith very well, I tend to just step in and give a hand. And eventually Soko Films, as Bob mentioned, they started recording me, and that's where most of you guys probably know me from. And then I made my own channel, and here I am.
Yeah, so the reason why I wanted to get both of you on at the same time was because I used to watch Speaker's Corner a fair bit, but every time I'd go watch a Speaker's Corner video, I was always just amazingly underwhelmed by the Christian apologists there. But then one day Bob turned up, and I was just really, really impressed with Bob's apologetic there. And there's a reason why that is. And also then later Ben turned up, and I was like, wow, nice. So I thought, now we've got two like really decent Christian apologists over at the corner. And I think you two are the best there. I'm not going to mince my words. And you're both really good. And so that's why I wanted to have you both on, because I find that your approach to apologetics is a holistic one. So it's not just about the Bible. And that's perhaps because you're both have a respect for a notion of an apostolic church, whether it be, Roman Catholicism, and for Ben, for Bob, it's a bit more complicated. And I'm Orthodox. So for me, the way that you guys use the apostolic fathers in debates at Speaker's Corner is extremely commensurate to an Orthodox apologetic, and so that's why it was appealing to me, and that's why I was attracted to it. And I think that also using the Apostolic Fathers really kind of seals the deal in terms of debating Muslims, because although Roman Catholics, Orthodox may have and other apostolic tactile apostolic churches may have differences, doctrinal differences, I think that when it comes to debating Muslims, you essentially get to brass tacks pretty quickly. The issues that we have amongst one another don't really play in too much when it comes to the fundamentals, which is what we're going to talk about. So yeah, I suppose my first kind of point of discussion is what is debating Muslims at the corner like? So what is so let's say you encounter a Muslim, like a random Muslim, let's say on average, what are kind of the main arguments you get? And then when you respond to them, what are the sort of main reactions that you get? And so I thought Bob would go first, and then, yeah, we'll just do that order, like Bob, Ben, back to me kind of thing.
For me, my experience of it depends on the Muslims that you speak to. The vast majority of Muslims that you meet at the corner are just repeating a script that they have absorbed either consciously or unconsciously, with a series of set arguments that they're able to pad out and articulate with varying degrees of clarity. And the Dawah team, who are a specific number of characters who go to the corner on a regular basis, this is their bread and butter, this Dawah script. So they are the ones that are able to articulate it in its fullest form, put in a bit of spice, in quote marks, evidence to their arguments. But even the most bog standard Muslim that you meet at the corner is able to marshal some part of the script. And that's usually there's more than 10, and I'm not going to list all 10, but I'm busy writing a reply to 10 of the key ones, which I'm doing training on for people that want it. But it's things like the Bible has been changed and corrupted. We don't know who wrote the Bible, so therefore it can't be trusted. Jesus Christ never claimed to be God, or Jesus Christ isn't God. He's just a prophet. The Trinity doesn't make sense. One can't be three, and three can't be one. There's obviously some very spin-off. There are various spin-offs from some of these basic scriptural arguments. And there are some that are completely left-wing. They come out of nowhere. They're not particularly scripted, i.e. they're not used by lots of Muslims, but they may be used by some Muslims. So like, you guys worship, you're idol worshippers, you worship a cross, that kind of thing. These are the kind of arguments that I hear. And in terms of replies, obviously all of them do have a reply, but I've noticed that the moment you take them off their script, i.e. the anticipated answer, and that's why I use the church, well, it's not just why I use the church fathers, but it's why the church fathers are so useful, is that it immediately removes them from their script. And once they're off their script, they're lost. They're completely lost. And that would be, in short summary form, my experience of the Speaker's Corner and evangelizing Muslims.
Yeah, mine's obviously very much similar. We encounter the same people. I would say it like this: you get the very, as Bob referenced, you get those people who have a very simplistic understanding. They've probably grown up watching, throughout their teen years, Ahmed Deedat, people like that, and they just regurgitate, as Bob said, they regurgitate the arguments. They don't fully understand the arguments they're making, and they don't even know necessarily where these Bible verses are that they may bring up. As Bob said, they're just repeating something they've heard. So you get that kind of level of apologetics where they'll just say, well, John 5:30. And then when you actually go through John chapter 5 to show, well, I'm sorry, this doesn't work. If you actually walk through John 5, for example, when I debated Hashim, he used John 5:30. And when I tried to walk through John 5 with him to show him actually John 5 does not teach that Jesus was this Islamic prophet, actually it shows he's much more than that. He then had to run off to Hebrews 7, Melchizedek, and all of these other kind of different arguments just to avoid the argument he made to begin with. So you often find that they'll bring an argument. Okay, the kind of lower tier ones, they'll bring an argument. When you address that argument, they'll just run off somewhere else. So you get that kind of level of argumentation. But then you get what I've found with certain people. There's a guy they called Naz. I know you know him, Bob. Naz. He uses basically Shabir Ali arguments. It's like, that there's been a development in Christology. This is one I've personally found that's becoming more popular at Speaker's Corner, that they'll argue that in Mark's gospel, there's no real Christology in a sense of showing Jesus is divine, but actually it just shows Jesus as a good prophet, as a good Jewish prophet, and no more than that. And then they'll say, when you get to John's gospel, you see this high Christology, you see this almost cosmic Jesus that you don't see in the earlier gospels, for example. So there are, I kind of separate them into two categories. You kind of have, without being rude, the kind of low IQ arguments that, Jesus says the Father is greater than I, something like that. They'll just repeat that because they've heard someone say it. And then you get like Naz, who kind of goes a bit deeper into like textual criticism. They may bring up arguments in regards to like, the longer ending of Mark. Should it be there? Shouldn't it be there? And because you have this kind of discrepancy, can we really trust the Bible? And it kind of comes down to those two camps, is how I would put it.
I would, I'd add to that, because as Ben was talking, other thoughts came to my mind. I would say that you could honestly describe the Muslims at the corner, and particularly the way that they stick to their arguments, as doggedly. It doesn't matter how much you demonstrate the illogical application of their arguments, or the inconsistency of their arguments, or even how their own logic and presuppositions might undermine Islam if they actually applied them fairly and equally. They will just stick to their script in a way that I think, like some Christians could do with a similar kind of steel. And the other thing that that Ben pointed out is they jump around the Bible a bit like a Jay Witness. I don't know if anyone's ever evangelized someone from the Watchtower, but the moment you pin them on the verse that they've shown you and try to show, well, actually, let's look above and below the line you've just read, and let's actually look at this in context, they quickly want to run to the next passage that's in another book, and they just jump around taking verses out of context. And that's exactly how the Dawah team operate. They jump around verses, and if you don't know your Bible, they'll run rings around you. And I would say that people like Naz and Hashim, they've got a bit of flair, a bit of sales pitch. They'll throw in, Paul Williams is terrible for this. He'll throw in scholars that he's never even read, or scholars that he hasn't understood, to make them quote. Like they were at one time when I first arrived at the corner, they were all very happy to quote Bart Ehrman, until I pointed out that Bart Ehrman actually says that no Christian doctrine is affected by any textual variant. And immediately he's now fallen out of use, So yeah, I think that a good sales technique is often wrapped up with their dawah, a bit of showmanship.
Yeah, you'll have to find, as you said, Bob, when you were speaking there, something came to my mind. You mentioned Paul Williams. It's not just Paul Williams. It's also people like, I would accuse Naz of this too, as much as I like Naz. I do like Paul too, but you often find that a lot of their arguments are arbitrary. Like for example, Paul Williams, I was discussing with Paul Williams, he was talking about Matthew's gospel, that he says in Matthew's gospel, in the earlier chapters, you see Jesus is just this good Muslim prophet, etc., etc. And he was trying to argue, and I say dishonestly, this is what I think dishonestly, because Paul Williams knows full well that Matthew's gospel does have a high Christology. He knows full well Matthew's gospel teaches the crucifixion and the resurrection. He knows full well of these things, but he was speaking to someone who wasn't very clued up in regards to the New Testament, and he was trying to argue as if Matthew's gospel teaches the Islamic Jesus. And when I was listening, he then said to this Christian guy, he said, we need to take Matthew's gospel as a whole. And I then jumped in and said, what do you mean take his gospel as a whole? In the earlier chapters, when you think that it simply teaches he's just a prophet, a good Muslim prophet, which I think I can get into and disagree with him over that. I said, you're saying we must take this as a whole, but at the end of Matthew's gospel, you won't take that as a whole, because at the end of the gospel, we see a crucifixion and a resurrection. So you're arbitrarily picking and choosing from the gospels which you like, and you can trust that. You say you trust that. But then when we bring something to you from that same gospel that disproves the entire argument you're trying to make, they'll often say, well, no, we can't trust this. So there's a double standard. When it's good for them, it can be trustworthy, and they'll argue from it to prove their points. When you refute their argument, suddenly it's no longer trustworthy. So there is, I would say, not amongst them all, but amongst some, a layer of dishonesty.
Yeah, I am, and I'll say this frankly, amongst the Dawa team, i.e. the regular Islamic figures at the corner, I'm quite happy to say there isn't any of them that are honest. Not one. I haven't encountered one that I find to be genuinely honest and sincere. Now, that doesn't mean that some of the other Muslims that come to the corner aren't honest and sincere. I've certainly met those, but the characters of the Dawa team, the Hijab, Ali, Hashim, Mansour, the lying and dishonesty and inconsistency has actually become so normal to them that they can't even see that they're doing it. And a perfect example is, as you pointed out, their ad hoc and post hoc use of scripture. It's kind of like, when it suits me, it's reliable. When it doesn't suit me, it's not reliable. If it suits me and you don't know the answer, you should believe it. But if you catch me out on misusing the text, well, my fallback position is to say that none of the text is reliable. And it's kind of like, and you find this when you catch them out. So the idea of this myth of an increased Christology from Mark to John, or from Matthew to John, depending on who you want to believe comes first. But like in Matthew chapter 11, verses 27, it says, all things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal him. Now, if I had not told you that was in Matthew, you'd be forgiven for thinking that sounded like John's gospel. And even scholars comment, they call this the bolt out of the Johannine blue. That's how the scholars refer to this passage. So this idea that the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Mark have different levels of Christology is just false. And we can show divinity in Mark's gospel, we can show divinity in Luke's gospel. All of them have the same Christology. It's just that John has a very specific way that he wants to draw out his experiences of Christ.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, this is why I say there is that layer of dishonesty, because most of these people like Paul Williams, Hashim, most likely they've read Mark. I would say they've definitely read Mark at least. But then they'll argue that Mark doesn't have a high Christology. And it's either they're not reading very carefully, or they're just being incredibly dishonest. And maybe it's a lack of knowledge of the Old Testament too, because if you just simply read Mark's gospel, he opens up with such a high Christology. He actually references explicitly from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. And in Isaiah 40, verse 3, it says that there will be a messenger in the wilderness preparing the way for God. Mm-hmm. So there's this messenger in the wilderness that is going to be preparing the way for God himself. And then what does Mark do? He actually shows us that John the Baptist is this messenger in the wilderness who's preparing the way for someone. Who is he preparing the way for? Evidently Jesus. So what's Mark doing here? He's drawing from Isaiah 40, verse 3, and he's applying it directly to John the Baptist and to Christ. So if Mark's point was that Jesus is just a good Jewish prophet and, he's not claiming divinity or anything like this, then why in the world would he start off with that prophecy? It would be counterproductive.
Yeah, totally. And they Christ himself makes reference to the passage in Micah where it says about, again, the messenger going before his face. I'm not sure where, I think, is it in Micah chapter
Micah 3, I believe.
3 verse 1.
Chapter 3 verse 1.
Yeah. Hear now, heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel, is it not for you to know justice? No, it's not 3 verse 1. But
6. I think it's verse 6. I could be wrong.
No, I don't think it is. Bear with us. But it'll come to me. But there's in fact, you find it, Ben, while I'm talking. But there's a passage in Micah that Christ himself quotes referring to John. That Christ himself in the Gospels quotes as referring to John, and that is his way of interpreting this Old Testament passage, and that ends up being referring to himself. And this is in the Synoptic Gospels, and also the fact that Christ in the Synoptic Gospels he quotes Psalm 110 as a messianic psalm, and that messianic psalm speaks of the Adonai being present at the time of David. You know, Yahweh said to my Adonai, sit on my right hand side until I've placed all your enemies under your feet, and says of this Adonai that he will be a priest in the order of Melchizedek forever. Now, that's clearly more than a prophet, and Christ himself is quoting this psalm as a messianic psalm, with an understanding that this is actually a psalm that's talking to him. You know, so it is, and I think you're too generous. I honestly think you're too generous. The Dawa, I think the only person out of the Dawa characters that has genuinely probably read an entire gospel is Paul. I don't think the rest have ever. Yeah, I don't think the rest have ever once read a gospel all the way through. They've only ever read verses and verses that suit them. Maybe. I am charitable. I do try to be charitable. I think you're too generous by far.
No, but it's not even that. But when you get to, for example, in Mark chapter 2, and I actually think that Mark has a very high Christology. I think you could debate for the deity of Christ just in Mark alone. Recently
Anthony Rogers does. He's made it a point now to just Anthony Rogers. He just makes it a point now to just debate is Jesus God according to Mark?
I mean, for example, in Mark, for example, let me go there. If you go to Mark chapter, hold on, it's when he draws from the prophecy in Daniel chapter 7, for example. Let me just go there. So if you used to go to Mark, when he references that he is the Son of Man who will come on the clouds, etc., etc., we all know the passage is a popular passage. But the problem is the Jews actually accused him of blasphemy for this. They wanted to kill him for this. I think it's Mark 14 verse 62 or 63. They wanted to kill him. Why would that be? Because they recognize that he's actually claiming to be divine here. Because if you was to read, for example, in the Greek Septuagint, the word used there when it says in Daniel 7 that all nations will serve him, I believe it's actually latruo, which is religious worship. So when he claims this, there's a reason why they kick off and accuse him of blasphemy. If he was just claiming to be a Messiah figure, they wouldn't accuse him of blasphemy, because we see in the book of Acts that it mentions other Messiah figures and they were never accused of blasphemy. It just references they went off and died out or the Romans killed them.
Yeah, this isn't something I've ever asked a Muslim, and I've interacted with a lot of Muslims, but on this channel, we mainly do kind of more highfalutin, like kind of philosophical stuff. But this is why I wanted to do this stream, to kind of get more down to earth, like I did with Father Stephen, because I think, and we'll talk about this a bit later, so to the side. But like, I've never asked them, what was Jesus's crime in the Quran for them to want to kill him?
It's a question that I've not asked at the corner. It might be a good question for me to ask. You know, I struggle to get the Muslims to tell me why they call him the Christ. And the only answer that I get from them implies that they're not translating the word from Arabic correctly into English, because Christ is a translation of the word Messiah, and Messiah means anointed one. But the word that they're using is not an equivalent to Messiah. The word that they're using is something like healer, you know, or it's very fuzzy when you press Muslims to, like, what does the Arabic mean? Apart from the fact that they often accuse you, well, you can't read Arabic, to which the answer is always, well, can you? And invariably, the answer is no, or not very well. and so it's kind of like, you can't criticize the Quran if you don't know Arabic, but you can sell Islam to people if you don't know Arabic, which I always find ironic, you know. But
and they can critique the Bible
so
without
when you
knowing
press
Greek.
them on, and yeah, exactly, and they can, and this is what I mean. They've got these inconsistent ways of arguing. It's kind of like your logic undermines your own position, you know. And if the only way you can attack the Christian faith is by using a set of presuppositions that immediately undermine your own argument, it just tells you that they're not thinking. They're really not thinking. So
what are the main ones then? So it's, sorry, just to clarify, so it's the inspiration and preservation of the scriptures, the deity of Christ in the scriptures, and
the Trinity.
The Trinity. Now, here's one thing.
Go on.
I was just wondering about the Trinity. I've become kind of more and more convinced, and this is kind of related to this question I wanted to go into, which was how should people engage their Muslim friends on these issues? But for me, I found more and more that from all the Muslims that I've seen convert to Orthodoxy, for them, what they say, they never say that the reason I converted to Orthodoxy was or Christianity was because the Trinity finally made sense to me. Like, that's not why that's never the reason I hear. It's always something like, oh, well, I realize that the Christianity has a true continuity with the Old Testament and the prophets. Islam doesn't. The deity of Christ is obviously in the New Testament scriptures, and the historical evidence is just really quite overwhelming. That's pretty much the reasons I get. And so that's the thing, is on here we do a lot of highfalutin metaphysics, and I haven't spoken about this much to my audience, but for me and Kai, a lot of what we're doing in terms of the hard philosophical stuff is really kind of more just an experiment, to be honest, with the whole Islam thing. But that we can talk about that. I can talk about that to my viewers another time. But that's what I wanted to ask you was, like, do you really think that, because I see them using the Trinity more as like a cudgel, as more kind of like an excuse, because I think most Muslims have a concept that God is, he is transcendent, you know, he isn't able to be circumscribed by the mind, you know. They always put at the end of their commentaries, you know, and Allah knows best, and Allah knows best, and Allah knows best. You know, we don't ask how these things are, kind of, that's really common in the creedal stuff. So we only affirm that it is the case. And so, yeah, do you guys think that's true? What do you think of my take on that?
My experience is that the whole Trinity argument is a red herring from the beginning, but it's one of their chief lances, it's one of their chief daggers, and it's one of their chief attack points. And the reason for it is so many Christians are so ill-equipped to explain the Trinity, and that's because, for whatever reasons, you know, Christians haven't got a culture of apologetics, and we haven't got a very, well, I mean, we do, the church has given us a very clear statement of the Trinity. It's called the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, but Christians don't use it. They often will try to make up their own thing, partly because Reformed Christians have lost their sense of history, but even Catholic Christians don't have a you know, and by that I mean it in its broadest sense, not Roman Catholic, but Catholic by the structure of the church. Catholic Christians, a lot of them don't have and have never thought about, well, how would I explain the Trinity to people? And for that reason, it's a very easy attack point that then Christians start to trip themselves up on, and it causes Christians to doubt their faith. In my experience, one of the principal arguments that Muslims use against the Trinity is, how can 3 be 1 and 1 be 3? And when you say it like that, it sounds like, oh yeah, you might be onto something there. But then you can point out all the counter examples of where 3 is 1 and 1 is 3, like 3-dimensional space. And a Muslim will get it in that context. But then the moment you start to say, well, now you've understood it in that context, why are you struggling over here? And it seems to me it's more like a mantra in their head. It's like they tell themselves it can't make sense, so therefore it doesn't make sense. They don't actually just shut down that internal voice and go, right, well, let me look at the argument that's in front of me, and does it make sense? Because again and again and again, Muslims can get the idea of plurality and singularity in other contexts by other examples. But then the moment you say, right, well, now let's talk about Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, then their mantra pipes up again, and it's like, oh no, three can't be one can't be three. But you accepted plurality and singularity when I talked about three-dimensional space, for instance. So it's more the fact that they feel a weakness in Christians. I think you're right. Like, it's not, I've not met a Muslim that's gone, I've not met a Christian who was a Muslim who said, I've become a Christian because the Trinity made sense. That's never been a thing that I've encountered either. But the reason why it's a big thing for them is because they trip up so many Christians by it.
What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I think that from my experience is that they have this view in their mind. They accept that the Bible teaches the Father is God. That they accept that. They accept the one God there is referred to as the Father. But I kind of view it like this. I always ask them, when we look at anyone in history, whether it be Muhammad, for example, if we were to look at if we really want to study Muhammad's life and to know really who he is and who people believed he was, we should look at the earliest sources on his life. So I then say, let's look at the Quran, the Sunnah, the Hadith, things like this, the earliest biographies. We need to know what these people talked about him to really get a more of a historical view, in a sense. I know there are debates about whether Muhammad existed or not. That's a separate issue. And I just simply say, let's apply that same method to Christ. And when we look at the earliest accounts of the life of Christ, what do we see? We see claims that cannot be made if he was simply just a good Muslim prophet. So I kind of view it, if you open up to the idea that Christ really is divine in the earliest text, in the earliest Christians, things like this, then that opens the door to the doctrine of the Trinity, I believe. Because once you prove that they accept the Father's God, once you show them that actually Jesus Christ is fully divine, he's a divine, eternal person, that then opens up that door for more discussion, I think. Because if they accept the deity of Christ, they are then going to, I would say, accept the doctrine of the Trinity. And then you can go into showing, the arguments to show the distinction in John 14, John 16, the Holy Spirit being personal, being God, etc. So I think once you attack their arguments on the divinity of Christ, they don't really know how to argue against the Holy Spirit. So then they just have to listen, and it kind of opens up that door.
So these are all instances of us being kind of on the back foot, in the sense of having to defend our beliefs. And we've identified, it seems, the three kind of main kind of weapons they use, the main arguments they use, the main points. So you can say what you want to say, Bob, but also just lead into what would you say would be like the three, and you may have disagreement on this because you've probably not thought about it much kind of together, maybe individually, but what would be the three main kind of angles of attack you'd go on Islam? Like if you were to pick the three best ones, what would they be?
Go ahead, Bob.
So yeah, that's a really good question, actually, and I'd be interested to know Ben's answers on that one. I was just going to point out that all the attacks that Muslims launch against the Trinity are based upon a misunderstanding of the incarnation. They attack the Trinity through what they perceive to the incarnation to be or not to be. So they often attack the Trinity based on this idea that the divine changes and becomes human, as opposed to the divine taking unto itself a humanity. They attack the idea that they think that when Christ dies on the cross, that means that the divine has died on the cross, or that when Christ suffers, that the divine has suffered. And obviously it's by virtue of his humanity that these things occur. They say things like, well, how can God go to the toilet? Silly kind of low IQ kind of questions. And it's meant to mock and to ridicule. And so in terms of like 3 points of attack that I often use, firstly is the reprobate moral example of Muhammad. I mean, it truly is shocking. If we believe what the sources say about Muhammad, and I want to just remind everybody that all the sources about Muhammad himself come 100 to 200 plus years after Muhammad's death. So far, far later than the Gospels came after Christ or the epistles came after Christ. But certainly the reprobate, I'm not even saying it properly.
Reprobate.
Thank you. Reprobate moral example of Muhammad. And it truly is reprobate. It, rape, child molestation, theft, warmongering, desecration of holy sites, all the, horrendous things, religious and ethnic cleansing, something that Muslims complain about in China and Burma because it's being done to Muslims, and rightly so, because that's wrong. But some things that Muhammad himself did and wanted to have done to the Jews and the Christians in the Arabian Peninsula. Everybody knows about Muhammad looking at a 6-year-old and saying, I'm going to have that 6-year-old as my wife. How a 6-year-old can consent to marriage, I have no idea. There's no such thing as a 6-year-old woman. And other examples, what happened with Sophia, who was a Jewish woman that was captured, and within nights, less than a week, of her father and her husband and all of her relatives being killed or enslaved, she was married off and having sex with Muhammad. Something tells me that was rape, not consent. And there's lots of other examples that we can give, but we take up an entire show just talking about them. So that's one. The next one, I apologize, I will be quicker, is the fact that the Quran claims to be free of any and all errors. And that obviously is something that's very easy to knock it down in lots of different ways. And then the third line of attack is that Islam is a religion that has evolved, but it's meant to be a religion that was revealed at the time of Muhammad. There's clear examples of the evolution of Islam in lots of ways. And that demonstrates actually that a man has been involved in the fabrication of Islam. And that shouldn't happen if Muhammad was the one that revealed Islam.
What would you say, Ben? What are your top three? And don't include one of your top three, something Bob said, unless it was already in your mind before he said it.
Yeah, exactly. I've wrote down as three things I often use. So I would say, as I mentioned earlier, the historical Jesus. If, like I said, when we look at the earliest reliable sources on the life of Christ, the New Testament, we see divine claims. And then when we see Jesus establishing a church and sending out those apostles to teach and to preach, we see that these people they taught, for example, the apostolic fathers, what did they teach? I have Ignatius's epistles behind me. He explicitly calls Jesus the God. He references the Eucharist as the bread of God. So we see that the earliest followers of Christ and the message that's been taught throughout the church age has been entirely contradictory to Islam. So that would be one argument. I could go into more, but I'll keep the bullet points brief. So the historical Jesus, the historical church is one argument I would use. I would use one argument I find that they tend to struggle with is clear examples of Muhammad or whoever the author of the Quran may be, using pre-existing texts, changing them slightly and trying to pass them off as his own. For example, if you was to read in the Quran, Surah 19, you would see the story of Jesus in the cradle. So when Jesus is in the cradle, this story, it comes from a apocryphal accounts that none of us accept, obviously. And in the original story, it does say that Jesus Christ is speaking from the cradle, and he basically says, I am the Son of God, sent to bring salvation to the world. That's what the original apocryphal version says. But when that same story makes its way into the Quran, we see that it's changed to fit Muhammad's, or the author of the Quran's, narrative. He changes the words to, I am a servant of Allah sent with a book, which I assume they would believe is the Injil, although many of them argue that it's a oral teaching, the Injil, but that's another argument to make. So that's an argument I would make. There are scholars who have written works on this, Dr. R. Pewin, Dr. Lola Gunter, something German. They've written works on this to show that actually many of the texts Muhammad used existed hundreds of years before the time of Muhammad. And somehow it's quite funny that you actually, I believe it's the earliest biography of Muhammad's life is, I believe it's Ibn Hisham. And when he references Muhammad, he says that Muhammad used to sit at the mountain of Marwa with a Christian who used to teach him with resources. So I'm only assuming, put two and two together, some of these things he would have heard from these Christians he would have come in contact with on his travels, or people who he would have learned from. He's probably just taking these stories he's heard and trying to pass them off as his own, giving them a slight twist to fit this new narrative he's trying to give on the person of Jesus Christ. I'll then say, you mentioned something earlier, Lewis, which is something I think is pretty good, is continuity. For example, if we take the two books, let's take the Old Testament, let's take the New Testament, let's take the Quran. Okay. Now, if we look at the New Testament, do we see a perfect continuity between Old and New Testament? Yes, we do. We absolutely do. In fact, the New Testament authors go through great pains to show actually there are many types in the Old Testament that are fulfilled in Christ, and oftentimes in the church too. For example, if you was to read Hebrews chapter 7 to 10, you see a higher typology. You see the sacrificial system being referenced as a type of Christ, and Christ fulfilling this sacrificial system. In Islam, you have no such concept about this kind of stuff. There is no typology fulfilled in Islam. So I would say my three arguments would be, and in regards to the continuity, their concept of God is not a continuity with the Old Testament God either. Because if you read, for example, just turn one of their arguments around on them, they will often use Deuteronomy 18 to say, well, this is referring to Muhammad. Okay, well, the book of Deuteronomy is not in continuity with the God of Islam in any way, shape or form. Because for one, if you actually read when they make this argument that Muhammad is his prophet to be sent, if you actually read the immediate context of Deuteronomy 18, it's fulfilled in Deuteronomy 34, verse 9 to 12, in Joshua. He fulfills it immediately. But then you see that Jesus Christ is actually the ultimate fulfillment, because when you see in Acts chapter 3, verse 16 onwards, you see that actually Peter quotes directly from Deuteronomy 18 and applies that to Christ. Okay, so what do we see in the New Testament? They're using the Old Testament passages, the same passages Muhammad and other Muslims use to show that, well, this is talking about Muhammad. The church have already been using this and referring it to Jesus Christ. But when I say in continuity in their concept of God, when we read the Old Testament, staying with Deuteronomy, we see God is referred to as a father, even in the Old Testament. So when they say in the Quran, chapter 5 and chapter 6, that Allah is the father of no one, this is actually in contradiction with Deuteronomy itself, because in Deuteronomy 14, verse 1, it explicitly says that the Jews are the sons of God. Now, Muhammad says the Jews are not the sons of God. So there is no continuity in history with the historical Jesus. There is no continuity in the sacrificial systems, the types we see in the New Testament, in their concept of God. And I think there are errors in the Quran in terms of copying.
And they're obviously the moment you point any of that out, because that's one of the arguments that I use. It's where's the temple, where's the priesthood, where's the sacrifices? Like if where's that continuity? Why did Allah suddenly change his mind and decide, no, I don't want a temple anymore, I don't want a priesthood, and I don't want sacrifice? And their immediate fallback is, well, all of that's been corrupted and changed anyway. But in the next breath, they'll be quoting the passage that our Lord said when he said that neither jot nor tittle of the law shall pass away until all these things have been fulfilled, to argue that Christ was saying to keep the Old Testament law, which means that they're validating that particular verse. And they're also validating the idea that the law was there to be known in the first century, which undermines the whole idea of a corrupted text. Because if the law was there to be known at the time of Jesus, well, we know what the Old Testament looks like because we have first century documents called the Dead Sea Scrolls. And their history is just not the friend of Islam. Bear in mind that one of their claims is that Mecca is the oldest settled city in the history of the world since the first human beings. Well, the fact is the Romans, despite Muslims not knowing their history, the Romans did invade the Arabian Peninsula, and they never encountered a city called Mecca. So we know that it wasn't there in the early Roman period at the time of around just after Christ. So this idea that, and that's why they're just concreting over Mecca. Like, they're not doing the kind of archaeological digs that they're doing in Jerusalem. because history isn't the friend of Islam in any way. And the more you dig into history, the more Islam collapses. There's all kinds of problems historically with Islam.
Yeah, it's been kind of a thing I've been doing recently, is to just be, and I haven't recently in the last few years been that keen on kind of a historical critical approach, but I think that maybe that is the best way here, and it's the most easiest way to get across to people, because I just started doing this. I was just like, well, one of the central claims of Islam is that we teach what the previous prophets teach. Like, that's something that they'll say all the time. That's a constant claim. It's like, well, how would we verify that? It's like, well, well, if you go over to the Quran, you'll see, and it's like, whoa, hang on. You want me to verify your Quran using the Quran? Like that? That's not how it works. Okay, we have to have some reason to believe that the Quran is like legit, first of all, telling us anything about the history of the prophets. And also we have to go back and look at what history we actually do have. And that's something that Ben was doing that I saw recently. And I thought, yeah, maybe this is like doing this kind of step-by-step Socratic historical critical method is probably quite strong. So I've been trying to do that recently. And yeah, I think that this continuity question is seems to be really key. But one thing I want to note is that notice how the three kind of main things you guys picked, you have very different, but the Muslims seem like super unified about the, like, kind of sickeningly unified about what points they want to press with the Christians. I was wondering what you guys thought about that.
It's because Islam's after Christianity, and because the Quran equips, the Quran has within it very simplistic and erroneous attacks against the Christian faith. So even though the Quran doesn't understand what it's attacking, because in one place it even suggests modalism is what Christians believe, the idea that the Father becomes the Son, and, you know, confuses the Blessed Virgin Mary as part of the Trinity in another place, and confuses the idea of the Trinity with three gods. It does have these very simplistic polemics pointed in a Christian direction, which means that any Muslim who reads the Quran is equipped with some very weak polemics against the Christian faith. But what is amazing is how weak the apologetics are among so many Christians that they can't even refute these very simplistic, erroneous attacks from the Quran. And I think that's a culture problem, which maybe we'll get onto when we talk about muscular Christianity. But like in terms of the reason for that is because Islam comes after Christianity, was a missionary religion towards Christianity. The Quran and the Hadiths have in it simplistic attacks against the Christian faith, and Muslims have absorbed all of these, and some of these have all been distilled and sharpened a bit by people like Ahmadiyya and Zakir Naik. It's embarrassing, but it's true. And then these are popular figures within Muslim circles who then regurgitate the arguments in ad nauseum. By contrast, the Christians are divided by sects, by denominations. So even if there's a great apologist amongst the Orthodox Church, there's no guarantee that a Protestant or a Roman Catholic can ever hear about his work. And vice versa. There may be a fantastic apologist amongst the Roman Catholics that no one but a few Roman Catholics hear about. You're on mute, Lewis. You're on mute.
Thank you for noticing. Yeah, so one other thing I wanted to point out, and Ben can probably continue with what you were saying, what I said before, but also, and this is a thing that Jay pointed out to Paul Williams in his debate with Paul Williams. I don't know if you've seen it, but Jay pointed out that in terms of the Quran, you know, determining what's corrupt and what's not, the Quran doesn't actually tell you what's corrupt and what isn't. So you may use kind of general principles to say, or the Muslim's going to want to say that he gets general principles from the Quran that let him know certain bits are corrupt and others aren't. But it's not the Quran that causes the Bible to be corrupt in the places that it is. So you need to have another method in order to determine what is corrupt and what isn't, because the Quran doesn't tell you that. You need to have a different methodology to, and even if you go with standard higher criticism, even that doesn't say that the whole text is like just corrupted to the extent that it would need to be for Islam to be true. But
Yeah, so when you said about the higher criticism, it doesn't tell you what exactly is necessarily corrupt. Yeah, that's totally right. And as you referenced, when Jay had that debate with Paul Williams, Paul Williams' whole entire methodology was arbitrary. It's like, I believe what the Quran says. So, and that's often what they do. They say at Speaker's Corner, Bob, you've heard it a number of times, it's that common saying that the Quran is their yardstick. Whatever agrees with the Quran, that accepts. Whatever doesn't agree with the Quran, well, that must be corrupted, which is obviously begging the question to begin with. But when they fall back on something, when you say to them, because I've said it a number of times, when they say, well, it's corrupted, I say, well, show me where. Give me a case where it's corrupted. Show me one text, one portion, one passage, one chapter, one book where it's corrupted. And the one I tend to hear the most, well, there's two. You always get the 1 John 5:7 one. But I've actually had a lot of Muslims bring up the longer ending of Mark to me, and they'll often use arguments, and I can always guarantee where they've heard it from, because there are even Christians who will say, well, it's okay, Christians can disagree amongst themselves whether they accept the longer ending of Mark. I personally accept it, and I'll tell you why. Because people will say, well, we have Christians saying it shouldn't be in the Bible. So even your Christians are admitting it's corrupt. And it's like, hold on. They're not saying it's corrupt. They're just saying they don't believe that belongs in the Bible. That doesn't therefore logically follow that the Bible is corrupt itself. It doesn't follow to that conclusion. But I tend to give this argument for the longer ending of Mark, because they'll say, well, it's not found in the earliest manuscripts. And I just say, okay, I'll give you that. Let's say that's true. Okay, it's not found in the earliest manuscripts. To me, that doesn't really make any difference, because we read the early church, okay, and I recommend every Christian read the early church, because you'll often find that every argument the Muslim makes or the Jehovah's Witness makes, most of them are rehashed Arian arguments anyway. So you're going to come across these arguments in the church fathers, and you'll see how the church fathers dealt with these arguments. But I often give this example from Saint Irenaeus, who predates the earliest manuscripts, because when you read Saint Irenaeus in his work against heresies, in book 3, chapter 10, verse 6, he explicitly quotes from Mark chapter 16, verse 19, which shows us what? It shows us that the copy of Mark that Irenaeus had the longer ending. So although the earliest manuscripts may not have the longer ending, it doesn't affect us, and we can still accept the longer ending of Mark as authentic without appealing to the earliest manuscripts, which I've always found takes that ammunition away, because I've never had a Muslim respond to that sufficiently, ever. When you give evidence from the church fathers to show the fathers had this, they have nothing to come back with. Why? Because they don't read the early church. They just hear these things. Maybe it's Shabir Ali when he debates James White or David Wood. Well, the longer ending of Mark isn't there. It's been developed. It's corrupted. You can't trust it, etc., etc. You Christians don't even agree. And when I think you go to the early church, you kind of take their legs away from them.
And that's true. I think, though, the whole argument is off to a wrong foot, because they are using Islamic categories to try and talk about the Bible. The Christian faith, any knowledgeable Christian will say that the Christian faith isn't a book-based faith. The churches existed before any of the books of the Bible were written, and many of the books of the New Testament were written precisely because a church needed to hear from an apostle. And so it's not whether the text is pure, but whether the message is pure. When we preach the gospel, if someone says, based upon our preaching, that they're willing to accept Christ as their Lord and their Savior, we're not going to turn around to them and say, well, no, you can't become a Christian until you've read the entirety of the New Testament and agreed that you believe in everything that the 27 books teach. So the whole argument is cart before horse. Yeah. It gets the prism wrong. It gets the dynamics wrong, because it's about the purity of the gospel message, of which the Gospels are witness to, of which the epistles are witness to, of which is contained within the church. and that is spread by the church. The other problem with that argument is that it betrays a huge ignorance, because where Christians like me and Ben, for instance, may disagree about the longer ending of Mark, we both accept 27 books of the New Testament. But Muslims will fight tooth and nail about which hadiths to believe in. Shia Muslims don't accept the testimony of Aisha, which means that they reject a whole bunch of hadiths that Sunni Muslims accept. And depending on which hadiths you use, you're going to end up with a very different interpretation of certain Quranic verses. And that's why Shiaism looks very different from Sunni Islam. And the Ibadis, which are a third sect of Islam, have different hadiths again. In fact, all the different Islamic sects use different hadiths. And that's why you get different Islams, and so it's a case of a person who's in a glass house throwing a stone when they try to point out these kinds of textual variants. But it's also misunderstanding the place of the Bible, and assuming that it has the same place in Christianity that Islam has for the Quran. Because a textual variant in the Quran is a truly devastating thing, whereas a textual variant in the Bible is not necessarily a devastating thing. And as Bart Ehrman said, not a single, and Dr. Dan Wallace agrees, there's no textual variant that affects any essential Christian doctrine, not one.
Yeah, I would agree. And you are right, Bob. They're assuming that if they can find a discrepancy amongst Christians in terms of the Bible, Christianity is somehow invalidated. And that's just simply not the case. Because as you said, Christianity, the Christian faith is not restricted to the book. There are many early churches who didn't have a full canon, and they functioned as fine churches. Absolutely. It's like they think, well, if they was to look back into the early church and recognize that, let's say, the church in Philippi did not have all the Gospels, did not have all of Paul's epistles, did not have Peter's epistles, the church functioned absolutely fine without those epistles. Why? Because they had the church teaching. They had that authoritative church teaching authority. But then when you said about the purity of the Christian message throughout history, when we do look at what was taught throughout church history, all they can do ultimately is appeal to heretics. I mean, for example, to deny the crucifixion in terms of a historical argument, who will they appeal to? They will appeal to Basilides, okay, which if you look at Basilides, he actually, I think he did have this replacement theory that it was somebody else on the cross other than Christ. And lo and behold, you find this same heretical teaching in the Quran. Yeah, I would say this could be another story. Maybe someone told him down the line, let's say, because you do have the Gospel of Basilides, and you can read this kind of writing. So all they have to appeal to ultimately is heretics, or what they seem to believe is a development within church history. For example, we've all heard the Council of Nicaea argument. Jesus was only taught to be God at the Council of Nicaea. The Trinity was only taught at the Council of Nicaea, ignoring every single church father that comes before Nicaea, ignoring the fact that even before Nicaea, we had these Christological discussions going on, whether it be Marcionism, which was dualism ultimately, and rejecting, he had this problem that the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, he couldn't, the God of the Old Testament was his angry, Jewish, wrathful God. The God of the New Testament was his lovely Jesus, which presupposes what? When the church called him and, called him out for his heresy, what does that show you? The early church, well before Nicaea, accepted the fact that Jesus is God. And as I mentioned, just simply read the Apostolic Fathers. Ignatius explicitly calls Jesus the God, says that calls the Eucharist the bread of God. Clement refers to Jesus as God. Every Apostolic Father believed in the divinity of Christ. You have the hypostatic union.
Even the earliest heretics believed in the divinity of Christ. Yeah. Like the Docetists.
That's what I want to say as well is Arius was excommunicated by his archbishop, by his own patriarch. Mm-hmm. So it's not like the Trinitarians came along later or something like that. They were the orthodoxy.
Yeah, even in regards to
the Docetists. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go on, Luce. I was just going to say, like, it's such a ridiculous argument, the idea that the Trinity was invented at the Council of Nicaea, or that the divinity of Christ was invented at the Council of Nicaea, because the Docetists were one of the very first heresies that the church had to fight, and they weren't denying the divinity of Christ; they were denying his true humanity. You know, and then the modalists were one of they predate the Arians. It was because of the modalists that you ended up with the Arians. And the modalists were not denying the divinity of Christ. They were just denying that he was someone other than the Father. So they were saying that he was divine. So,
well, the thing as well is that even the Arians, and people don't understand this, by the way, if people are sending super chats, like, feel free to put a question in, because even the Council of Nicaea, and this is something that was, we know well now, is that the Council of Nicaea wasn't, is Jesus divine, yes or no? Everyone who went to the Council of Nicaea agreed, or everyone who was involved in the debate of Nicaea, the Arians and the so-called semi-Arians, believed that Jesus was divine. They would say that Jesus is God. The debate over was how was Jesus divine? In what way? And the clincher for Nicaea was the homoousion, was whether the Father and the Son were identical in nature, or if they were like in nature, or if they were just like. So these were the two semi-Arian positions. And then there was the hardline Arian position of dislike in essence, or dislike in nature. So even that is just, I mean, this is the thing I also been thinking of asking Muslims, is like, where is your group in the first 6 centuries? Like, where is it? Where are the Muslims?
That this is a key point, is that Islam develops, like the idea of Sharia law develops. The 4 legal schools, the classical legal schools, they came later. The hadiths, they came later. The Quran itself is a post-Muhammad creation. The actual Quran is a post-Muhammad creation. The hadiths are a post-Muhammad creation. The law schools are a post-Muhammad creation. Islamic theology and their understanding of God went through massive development, particularly because of having to deal with groups like the Mu'tazilites. These were all post-Muhammad developments. Essential things that are considered classical Islam today come after Muhammad. And this is the thing that when you start to study it, you begin to see, well, if the Quran says on this day I have perfected your religion, then why is it there's so much development after the time of Muhammad?
Yeah, like Lewis said, even the heretics believed in the divinity of Christ. It was just how, whether it was the modalists, the Arians, the Eutychians, Apollinarians, all of these groups accepted the divinity of Christ, but it was how they accepted it, and that's where the disagreement was over. But when Lewis said, where were the early Muslims, who do they claim for themselves? The only ones I've really heard them claim, and they never say, I've never heard them say, these were the early Muslims. They tend to point to groups that they think held slightly Islamic theology. They'll often refer to, like I said, Basilides, because Basilides had this kind of replacement theory, if you like. But then just simply read Basilides, he did not agree in any way, shape or form with Islam. They'll often reference some Jewish sects like the Ebionites, the Essenes, things like this. They reference groups that reject the virgin birth. So even according to them, these groups they reference as possible early Muslims, they would have to consider heretics. And they reference these groups because they haven't really thought this through. They haven't read this historical people. They're just simply hearing something online and they're just regurgitating it at Speaker's Corner, hoping for the best.
But the reason why they've been doing that for so long is because actually that is enough to throw a lot of Christians. I can't stress this enough. Like, as much as me and you, Ben, and you, Lewis, may listen to these arguments and laugh at how low IQ they are and how childish they are, too many of our brothers and sisters would actually get thrown by these arguments because we haven't got within our fellowships a culture of apologetics. Like, I mean, at the church you go to, you don't need to name it, but are they teaching apologetics? That's to both of you.
Yes.
They are.
Well,
Good.
hopefully mine will be. I hope to, because I'm designing.
Probably because of you. There you go. Because of you. Yeah.
Maybe so. But I am planning to infuse apologetics in some sense. I don't want people to be ignorant when they join the church.
If you asked your audience how many of them are being taught apologetics in their fellowships, I bet a good number are going to say no, and that's the problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, this kind of goes forwards a bit. So, what would be, your advice to all the Christians who are listening here, who are part of churches, and are aware of this stuff?
Who's that to?
Well, I know, Bob, you talk about this. I've heard you talk about this more than Ben. So you first.
Okay, so I think that the challenge that Islam presents to us is more than just one about arguments on intellectual grounds. Islam presents a sociological, economic, and political challenge. And I think that really Christians are behind the curve on the apologetics and polemics front, i.e. arguments. We're behind the curve on that one. But we haven't even begun to imagine or to think about what it is to respond to the socio-economic and political challenge that Islam presents. Because the thing is, you can win every argument and debate, but if they are the ones that control the police, the judges, the councils, you lose. And the fact of the matter is that Muslim communities tend to be very solidified, consolidated groupings, very condensed into geographical space, which gives them potency. And that means that it's very hard to crack that nut for that reason. But it also means that they exert a disproportionate influence on society around them. And they are a force to the powers that be have to reckon with in their thinking, which is why they'd rather arrest the Christian preacher than, say, the Muslim youths that are insulting the Christian preacher, as we've seen examples of taken up by Christian Concern. Because that's the easy thing to do, rather than tackle the mob, you get rid of the one that the mob's upset with. And the church needs a kind of muscular Christianity, which at some point, if you want me to, I'll explore it in more detail.
Go ahead. I mean, we got there naturally, so go for it.
So, it'll probably take me about 5 minutes to try and explain it properly. So, I know it's a nice catchphrase, muscular Christianity. What does that look like? And everybody imagines going to the gym and getting buff. Yeah. I mean, fine, do that if you want to, but it's really, it's challenging what I have seen in fellowship after fellowship after fellowship after fellowship, which is timidity. There is a cowardice amongst too many Christians that needs to be addressed, because that cowardice and that conflict aversion is debilitating the church and disabling the church from carrying out our Lord's Great Commission. And we Christians as a community are like salt in too much water, or butter spread over too much toast. We're very thin on the ground. It's not that there aren't a lot of us, it's that we're just spread out too much. And in the face of that, we're facing progressive liberal thought, which dominates everything, but then a quite a powerful Islamic force as well that is increasing in strength. And the response to that is for Christians, to recover their sense of identity, that we are Christians, first and foremost, we are a people ourselves, and that we should have confidence that Christianity is the answer, and that we pursue, because we're a people, we pursue our own political, economic, socio-cultural agenda that is in accordance with our own beliefs and our own values as informed by history. And we're willing to stand up and defend that, and to defend one another. And so it's getting rid of that. It's having confidence in ourselves, confidence in our faith, confidence in our way of life, and being willing to stand up for it and to defend it. And a strand of that is being able to give good apologetics and to give good polemics, which is why every fellowship needs to practice that. But I really do think that Christians need to practice the Benedict option and to consolidate geographically. So that's muscular Christianity in a nutshell.
What do you think about that, Ben?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think when Bob said that the timidity, it is cowardice ultimately, because we tend to see this thing, even at Speaker's Corner. I've seen it. I've seen Christians. I think you've actually had a couple come up to you and say this kind of thing, Bob. You shouldn't be doing this. We should just show them love. When in reality, the most loving thing we can do is to do what we're doing, and that's to show them the falsehood of their worldview and to show them that the Christian worldview is the correct worldview. It's the worldview they should adopt. But ultimately, I do think you get people like that who come to Speaker's Corner and say, well, you shouldn't be doing this. You should just show them love, and this isn't loving. Ultimately, you get that because, as Bob said, it's not being done in the local parishes. So it needs to start, in my opinion, at the local church level. And local churches need to teach that actually, as a Christian, you can stand up for yourself. If somebody critiques your faith, you need to know how to defend this. And also, it's a good idea to know about the worldviews that are surrounding you, because you are going to come into contact with these different worldviews, whether it be Islam, whether it be Jehovah's Witnesses, wherever you are in the world. I think people should learn about the worldviews that surround them, whether you're in India and it's Hinduism, whether you're in London and it's Islam, whether you're in Utah and it's Mormonism. Learn about those worldviews, because you are going to come in contact with those worldviews. And I can guarantee people who hold to those worldviews will critique your worldview, and you need to know what to do about it.
I think though, it's also the Christians, and you know, Ben, that I am no hater of the Catholic Church. I love the Catholic Church. I love the Roman Catholic Church as much as I love the Orthodox Church. But I have noticed that there is a lot of cowardice within a lot of Roman Catholic Christians. In my experience, I've had more experience amongst Roman Catholics than, say, I have amongst Orthodox. So I pick on them because I want the Catholic Church to be strong, and I think that there's a palpable loss of confidence amongst Roman Catholics, even that Catholicism is the right answer. It's palpable that they are not convinced that actually that society needs to be following, say, Catholic teaching on social justice, or Catholic teaching on bioethics, or Catholic. There's that sense of, well, too many Christians are looking for a compromise, and this is rampant within the Anglican Church. They're sold on the idea of multiculturalism, this idea of let's live in harmony, a tapestry of different religions, all living side by side. Well, that's not what Christ commands us. Christ commands us to convert everybody to him in both breadth and depth of spirituality. And that's the most basic message of the Christian faith is, do you want to become a disciple of the Lord Jesus Christ? Do you want to be a student of Jesus the Messiah? That's the one line, the essence of the Christian message. But there's lots of Christians who think that that's a message for them, and then Muhammad is a message for Muslims, and Krishna is a message for Hindus, and Buddha is a message for Buddhism is a message for Buddhists, and they just want compromise. They want harmony. They want us to get along. Well, I mean, you've got to choose. Are you going to follow what Jesus commands you and calls you to, which means that you do seek disciples, which means you may risk suffering persecution and martyrdom. You may end up in conflict. Or do you want to go with the political concerns of our age, which are transient and passing, and betray Christ's great calling on your lives?
Yeah, I would say I do agree. By the way, there is that problem within Catholicism that there are many people who, as you said, there are. But then I would also extend that to Protestantism. I think every church has that problem. I think it kind of shows up in Catholicism more because we're much bigger. It's like anything that goes wrong in Catholicism, it's shown up much more because it's a bigger church. It's more visibly to be seen. You know what I mean? So I think this is a problem in the universal church, in the wider sense of the Catholic Church, if you know what I mean, in terms of really universality. But I would say that when you say it's their truth, I've heard multiple different Christians from different strands of the faith say that exact same thing. Well, it's true for me, so I don't need to necessarily preach it to them because I don't want to offend them, which is normally the first thing they say. But ultimately, it comes down to this subjectivity. It's true for me, and that's their truth over there. And I don't see that as the Christian message. I don't see that as the Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant message. The message should be that actually, no, truth is not subjective. There is an absolute truth. There is an objective truth. And when Jesus Christ claims to be this truth, and the apostles go out there and die for this truth, why are we then going to dilute that and say, well, actually, it's true for me, but it might not be true for you? No, the apostles died for this. Why would they die for this if it's just simply, it's just our truth? No one viewed it like that in church history. So why are we viewing it like that now? And it's simply because liberalism is creeping into the church.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we ended up in this mess through a long history. The Reformation and the Reformation Wars essentially traumatized the West. And you can trace out a journey from that trauma to where we are today. Essentially by the 1750s, certainly by the 1770s, and the establishment of the United States, you have a rupture in terms of the continuity of Western civilization that then starts to move away from Christianity. The thing is, as Christians, if we want to be more than hunters that capture the odd gazelle, if we want to see entire Muslim communities become Christian, we have to create the socio-economic and political circumstances in which that can happen. And that cannot happen in our current liberal progressive state. And it cannot happen whilst ever Christians are this diluted group that are divided amongst themselves denominationally. Now, I'm not a fantasist. I don't think that we can create one united denomination. I'm not. That's not my point. But Protestants, Catholics, and Orthodox working together, living together, side by side, closely in consolidated zones, will be able to exert more influence on society if they have the muscle to do so, the willingness to do so, the confidence to do so. That will mean that it is far easier for a Muslim to leave Islam, especially if we are the ones that are controlling the politics, the economics, and the society. But without that dimension, we will just have to settle for saving the soul here, the soul there, the soul in the other place. It's when all roads lead to Rome, in quote marks, i.e. the economic roads, the political roads, the social roads, that you'll see mass conversion. Something has to give. Now, there are the contrary examples, like in Iran, but the reason it's not so much that Christianity succeeded there as Islam failed catastrophically. Islam has always been an imposition on the Iranian people. They've always had a sense of their history being longer than Islam. And they're just sick of the Ayatollahs, and they recognize something beautiful in the Christian faith that's been brought to them by our Reformed Protestant brothers and sisters. And I think that the flat structure of Reformed churches often makes it a better underground church than the sort of hierarchical structures of the Catholic churches, which is why there's a mass movement towards Reformed Christianity in Iran, rather than, say, to Catholicism or to Orthodoxy, because it's a flatter structure. It's easier to go underground with that structure.
Yeah, so I think that when you reference, Bob, that this whole true for me, true for you, I think that ultimately, as we said earlier, comes back down to local churches in my opinion, and I'm not saying this is like a broad statement, there are solid churches who teach apologetics, teach people how to defend the faith, have good have good teaching. They really do discipleship brilliantly. I know some churches that do that. But when you have this kind of Christian, as we're characterizing here, it comes back down to, are they getting taught properly in the church? And I often find that there are many churches who aren't teaching the dire need of the Christian faith. And if they teach the dire need of the Christian faith, then we get stronger Christians who are more willing to stand up for really what they believe in and aren't just doormats for the world we live in.
We've got to tell the story of the martyrs again. If you want people to have the willingness to suffer for Christ, you have to tell the stories of the martyrs. That's what the early church did. When the Romans persecuted them, they honored the martyrs, and they told the stories of the martyrs, and this inspired robustness of spirit and confidence amongst the early church in the face of Roman persecution. If we want Christians to be able to stand up for their faith today, we have to tell the stories of the martyrs and the confessors today, and we have to cultivate that sense of solidarity around the martyrs and the confessors, those who suffer the faith. You know.
Well, that's
sorry. There's one. Go on.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. Finish.
I was just there's one point that I'd want to. There's one point in which me and Ben disagree. You see, I think Ben is still married to this idea of the local church, like a parish church surrounded by an ocean of disbelief. I think we need to actually consolidate, and take over Wessex, like literally just colonize Cornwall, or one city, and then start to exert and build outwards from there. And that's a very radical idea.
But no, it's not. But that would have to start in the local churches, would it not? The parish priest has to be teaching this, and other parish priests have to be teaching this. They have to be united. So I'm not saying it's always down to this local individual church on the corner over here. I do think churches should be united, but it comes down to, are the local churches doing their job in this bigger scheme, if you like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
well, this was something that really kind of woke me up to the big issue, because when I went to Birmingham to visit the mosque, it was like, wow. Like, I mean, it was pretty much like a Muslim community, literally just straight up Muslim community. And they had like 2 dawah stalls out there. The Christian churches were like dilapidated, like completely just dead. And and I realized, like, hang on, we're the pagans. Like, I wasn't thinking about Christians, but I mean, like, we, the English people, we're the pagans. And the Muslims are like the Christians, in the sense that there's that dynamic that was like there in the early church, where it was like the Christians are forming communities and trying to evangelize the pagans there, and being kind of forceful about it. But now it's like we're the pagans. Do you know that? Yeah,
I think that comes down to that everybody's got too comfortable, because when you said that the early church weren't like that, they were a tight-knit community, that's because they were under persecution. Now we aren't under persecution. People get comfortable, and there isn't that close community as there was in those earlier days.
Yeah, and the thing is, you'll never be able to get that unless you're geographically consolidated. I'm going to keep saying that, because that really is the key, is geographical consolidation. Because when you've got geographical consolidation, you are the one that ends up controlling the local economy. You're the one that ends up controlling the local cultural expressions. You're the one that ends up voting in who the MP is. You're the one that ends up voting in the local councillor. The police end up looking and sounding like you. So it's and that's what's happening in these places that Lewis went to. And this is what we Christians have got to realize, is we're not English. We're Christians, and the English are the ones that we have to convert. And the thing is, where the one that I don't have a clear answer for is our denominational divisions. There's no clear answer to that. So what I suggest is all the Orthodox go and consolidate in one place, and all the Catholics consolidate in a nearby place, but slightly off. And we start to control a geographical space and then build outwards, and that's how we work.
But you'd need to like really, you'd need to like really ingrain this into the lay people. Like how would you cause the lay people to start thinking and behaving this way? I mean, it just seems like such an immense undertaking. I think with Islam it kind of happened somewhat naturally because you had immigrant communities. That's what happened. You had the immigrant communities come in, and they'd come in together and they'd do their thing together. And they also happen to be Muslim, so they have that uniting factor. But we're all like sparsely spread out, and like Ben said, we're all so comfortable. We're all so comfortable. So it's almost like you would need someone in authority in every single church to be calling the shots. To be saying, look, there's this store over there that's being discriminatory towards Christians. Time to boycott. Time to do this. Time to do that.
Exactly. But there's
two problems with that, though, which when you respond, I'd like you to address. And these aren't problems that I have with it. These are practical problems. One, the authorities are going to get really, really peeved off by that. It's going to be like you'll just be on the newspapers for being horrible. The Muslims can get away with it somehow, probably because their communities, like you say, like for example, what happened recently, they tried to push, Skittles stuff into schools, right? And so basically, the Muslims kind of just said, no, like, lol, no, that's not going to happen, and stopped it. But if we started doing that, it's like the West. It's like the people in the West are just they have such an issue with Christianity. They've just been brainwashed by liberal media, and I assume some historical scandals in the church to think like this just wouldn't be tolerated. So yeah, go ahead, Bob.
So my thoughts. You said there were two problems, but you only mentioned the authorities. You didn't mention what the second problem was.
I may have wrapped them both into one and just kind of conceptually put them together.
Okay.
But yeah, I suppose that would be it. I think.
So my answer to the authorities question is: so what? Who cares? Like, if we upset them, we upset them. And if they don't like it, they don't like it. If they persecute us, it means because we're following Christ, we rejoice. Brilliant. And we have the spirituality of the martyrs. The reason why, when Christians are upset, everyone ignores us is because our networks are so broken because of denominationalism, and our community is so spread out that if we want to protest about something, most Christians don't hear about it, and those that hear about it are too far away. The reason why Islamic protests have worked in cities where, sadly, they've sent a teacher into hiding in Bentley and Spen, or whatever that constituency was, and the one in Bradford as well. And the reason why the state often is perceived to walk on tiptoes is because it's far easier to get a mass of people protesting if they're all your neighbors and they all live in the streets around you. And so schools have to listen to the parents of the children that send them. So if all of their parents are going, no, you're not teaching that to our kids, or we're all taking our kids out of school, then that's why they're effective. By contrast, if a Christian family goes, I don't like that, you're not teaching that to my kid, with the same kind of vigor that the Muslims do, it's just one family amongst hundreds. And of course, the school can just ignore that. But that's why you need to consolidate geographically, because then if we're all sending our kids to the same school and we don't like something that the head teacher's planning to teach the kids, well, we're all on the school governing board, and all the Christians go, no, you're not doing that. And the head teacher has to listen. And that is applied to the police, and it's applied to the councillors, and it's applied to the MPs, and it's applied to everything. And that's why we perceive that it's just that Muslims are a potent force because they're a consolidated force. And the church, through accident and design, has accepted that its only role in society is to perform acts of civil ritual, i.e. commemorate D-Day, commemorate the Battle of Britain, commemorate the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, or to be an NGO and to be a charity. And we've accepted that that is our role in society. But that's pretty much all we can do when we're so spread out. We can't organize the kind of dynamism that we need to when we're too far away from one another. Do you see how I'm thinking about this? And
yeah, so the second problem I thought of was, what do we do about the just keep this in mind, what do we do about the Christians in those communities who, when you have someone stepping up and saying, do this, do that, do this political thing, do this political thing, do this social thing, and not this thing, how do we deal with the Christians in that community who might kind of be very like super uncomfortable with this, like the church is becoming too political kind of thing, the church shouldn't be involved in this kind of stuff? And by the way, with a denominational issue, I think perhaps if, say, the Orthodox had strong kind of links with them within themselves, the Catholics parishes all had strong links within one another, and whatever add-on denominations. But then they had kind of like a weak, you could say like a weak link. These communities would link, like nodes would link within one another in a weak way, in the sense that you would have someone communicate between the two to say, this is what we're doing, or this is what's going on our end. And so I think that might be a way to maintain denominational kind of like
purity.
You know what I mean?
Purity. It's
Orthodox being like, orthodoxy isn't a denomination. I know that. What I'm saying is, between the different groups of Christians, you get a kind of rapport and a certain kind of unity at that, like a practical unity at that level.
Yeah, I think what you described when you said some Christians would disagree. Well, welcome to society. That's what a Christian society should have. It will have voices of disconcertment and voices of against the flow. But at least then it's Christians talking amongst themselves, and whatever comes out of that is going to be influenced by the Christian faith. And in terms of the denominational purity, I accept that it's a thing that's important to the vast majority of Christians. Like, it's important that for an Orthodox to be an Orthodox, and for a Roman Catholic to be a Roman Catholic, and for a Calvinist to be a Calvinist. I'm not a fantasist, but we need to recognize that all of our differences are secondary to what is coming down the track at us.
Yeah,
what is coming down the track at us is going to have a much bigger impact on all of us than any of our denominational arguments. And and for the sake of dealing with that challenge, like, I'm not saying we can't talk about these other issues. Of course, we're never going to stop talking about these other issues. But let's remember that uniting politically to and culturally to stop things like the liberalization of our communities or the Islamization of our communities requires a more muscular Christianity that expresses itself by common beliefs and values. And I think that when it comes to things like, what we want our children to learn in school, our cause solidarity with the persecuted church, our beliefs about marriage, our wanting to celebrate Easter, even if we do it at different times, we're all going to agree that these things are important.
The point is that our denominational disputes aren't going to matter if there's Sharia that's imposed on the country. Like, it's game over at that point.
Yeah. And go on, Ben.
No, yeah, I was going to say I agree with both, actually. I think in terms of the communities remaining the communities, the Orthodox remaining the Orthodox, the Catholic remaining the Catholic, it's impractical to think they're just going to go like this. It's really impractical. So they do, I say, need to remain within their camps, because they'd be inconsistent just to merge in such an ecumenical way where it'd be impractical. It just simply would be impractical. But as Lewis said, there should be that connection between the two groups where we recognize each other, I would say, as Christians, and you stand together as Christians for the wider Christian goal. For example, when we had the Paris attacks not too long ago, I think there were some Catholics who were actually killed. And or was it an Orthodox priest? I forget. It was either a Catholic priest or an Orthodox priest was killed. Lewis, do you remember?
I remember there was an Orthodox priest that was killed in Paris by some like Caucasian Muslim, but I thought it wasn't to do per se with Islam. I thought in the end it was about some kind of like personal familial issue or something.
No, but that was the example they used, and that is the case I'm referring to. It was an Orthodox priest, evidently. But somebody asked, I'm not going to name names, but somebody asked a Christian of a Protestant persuasion. They said, if that was a Catholic being attacked in that church, would you agree that Christians were attacked and you should stand with them? And he just said, no, I would say simply Catholics were killed. They're not Christians to stand with. And I think that's where the problem lies, that we should be able to say, yes, I'm a Catholic, I hold to Catholic, I hold to the Catholic Church, I hold to the Orthodox Church, I hold to the Protestant Church. But when we see each other as no longer Christians because of the denominational differences, that's when I say that's where the problem lies.
Totally. I completely agree, because it's about, love covers a multitude of sins. And obviously the differences between the various groups, there's a right and a wrong in all of these questions. But in terms of the fundamentals, like the fact that we believe in the Trinity, the fact that we believe in the crucifixion, the resurrection, the ascension, and the return of our Lord, the last day, the fact that the saints are alive in heaven, even Protestants believe in this, they just don't believe in the communion of saints after death. These are all things that we agree with. But bottom line is, a jihadis doesn't, like they don't in Pakistan and like they don't in Nigeria, they don't stop at the door and ask, well, is this a Roman Catholic or an Orthodox or a Protestant? What they see is a Christian.
Yeah, you know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of that that epithet about I think it was like, I think it had to do with Nazi Germany, and it's like, and it just makes me think, it's like, oh, and then they came for the Protestants and I said nothing. And then they came for the Roman Catholics and I said nothing. And then they came for the Orthodox and there was no one left to, and I just thought of that now. It's like, yeah, I mean, there needs to be, in terms of in terms of theology, there is a different priority to, in terms of practical survival of your people, your Christian, me as Orthodox, speaking about Orthodox brothers and sisters, and you perhaps speaking more broadly about Christians generally. Either way, you cut the cake. Whichever way you cut the cake, your practical, pragmatic priority when it comes to this issue, when it comes to Sharia and it comes to demographic changes, you're just not going to think about denominational concerns, in my opinion, because, like I said, once Sharia is imposed, it is game over. So
the question is, do we want the curve to force us into the Benedict option, or do we want to get ahead of the curve and take the initiative and then use the Benedict option as a position of strength by which we then push back? Yeah,
worst case scenario, you have Sharia, but then you have your Benedict option. And then
but that's the situation the Coptic Christians are finding themselves in. And yes, they've managed to survive, but no one would look at the Coptic Church and say that this is a church that's enjoyed the last 1400 years. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so 100%. Do we get ahead of the curve or not? That's the choice that we Christians face, and it is as stark as that in places like France and Germany and England. And the thing is, like, look at the people that are having this conversation. We're all quite young-faced. Like, these are the Patriarch of Moscow and the Pope talked about the blood of the martyrs being a uniting factor. They had this discussion about it in Cuba. I think it was Cuba where they had a conference together, and they talked about the fact of the blood of the martyrs uniting the church, and that is the spirituality actually that will unite us, because. For me, if I hear about an Orthodox priest being killed in Paris, or a Roman Catholic priest being killed in France, which happened at a terrorist attack, went into a Roman Catholic mass and killed a Catholic priest, I don't think to myself, oh, well, they're Orthodox or they're Catholic. I think that they love Jesus like I love Jesus, and someone killed them for that love. And that for me is enough that I want to stand with my brothers and sisters.
Yeah, even very anti-ecumenist Orthodox I see on Facebook will be in outrage when they see, even Protestants getting this bad treatment. So it's there. It's there. The sentiment's definitely there, even among the hardliners, because I think they know. They think they know that if that was them there, yeah.
And we need to cultivate this into a political agenda.
Yeah, it's. I don't know. This is something like we have to keep discussing more. And this, I mean, if we're going to start, starting with London, I suppose, but.
It starts with us like it's a big thing, and it's a conversation that needs to be had. But I guess the point that I'm trying to say is that it's very easy to think about all of these issues as if it's just about winning debates and arguments, and the church needs to realize it really isn't just about winning debates and arguments. Winning debates and arguments is important, absolutely. Learn your apologetics, learn your polemics, but it's also about winning sociological, political, and economic influences, because these are the prisms that our life runs through, and it influences the way that we organize and order our lives.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, if you look at history, if you look at how the church evangelized, and Muslims as well, took over areas religiously. For example, when Syria was perhaps first taken over by Muslims, the majority of the population wasn't Muslim. They took over the authority, the state structure. Same happened with Russia when Russia was evangelized. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff because of evangelism, but the main driving force for the conversion of the country was because the state was pushing it as an ideal, or it was a political push.
And this is a lesson that we Christians have forgotten since the Reformation.
Do you have anything to add, Ben?
No, I don't have anything to add to that. I mean, I agree. I don't think I could add anything to that.
Where would you like to take the conversation now, Lewis? Because it seems we're all in agreement.
This was pretty much. I mean, this was pretty much the most of my notes. So I think we've pretty much covered everything I was interested in. So I guess we could just go to Q&A. So I'm just going to look at this, what super chats we have. So there's, so John Solomon gave, I don't know what that currency is, but 5 of it. Vanya Ivanov said, "Keep up the good work, my brothers in Christ." He gave 449 rubles. Thank you, Vanya. And then there's Bert Purcell. He gave $10. He said, "Thank you for a great stream." Eugen, £5. He said, "We need to move out the cities and relocate to sparsely populated areas and build Orthodox/Christian villages, especially self-sufficient ones." So how viable do you think that idea is of kind of just like uprooting everyone and taking them out of?
I don't think it's so bad that we have to do that yet. There is a middle option, and I want to try and explain in as quickly as possible that I can do that. So from a sociological description, our churches effectively work like social clubs. We have our main Sunday event, and then we have other midweek events, and you tap into those as you want. And it's a voluntary association. But obviously, Christians are still so numerous that there are churches all over the place, and often there's churches right next door to one another. So there is a way that you can start to create what I'm talking about without uprooting. But it essentially means getting to know and getting to work with the other Christians in your geographical space. And then being a people and a community with the people in your geographical space without going and joining their church. You still tap into all your things that your church does, but then the other 5 days, 6 days of the week, you're going around one another's homes, you're eating together, you're praying together, you're studying together, you're sharing with one another what you've learned. You are helping one another when they need help. And then you from there, you start to build up this sense of local Benedict kind of community. Now, for those that want a more denominational example of that, then you've got to create essentially that's when you do have to get people to move. That's when the bishop says, to the Greek Orthodox Church, everyone move into this area, and you end up with little Greece, and you end up with little Russia, and hopefully little Greece and little Russia are right next to one another, and so there are ways that you can do this, but it isn't a case that we all need to go off Bruderhof style into the country. But the Bruderhof are an example in the UK of people doing exactly what the brother just said about uprooting, going into the country and setting up their own settlement and society. The thing about the Bruderhof, though, if they've got zero missionary purpose, and they're all pacifists. So, it's kind of like, but you can create what I'm talking about just by building up the networks in your local geographical area, but cultivating this sense of the people of God and cultivating this solidarity with the martyrs and the confessors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I think that there are two ways to look at that. If everyone was to just, as you said, just a mass exodus out of the cities and the populated areas and make small communities in the more rural areas, I see benefit in that, but at the same time, it can be counterproductive, because if we are called, as Christ says, to be salt and light in the communities, I don't think it would be a great idea to just leave the cities when it gets rough. For example, look at the persecution with the Christians in the city of Rome. They were being used as lampposts. They were stuck on poles and set on fire to light the streets. Now, yeah, there were Christians who left, but if every single Christian left, you're just giving them that territory, and then it's never going to be redeemed. I think personally, it's a good idea for some Christians to make those communities there, but there still needs to be, as Bob said, that missionary outreach, and that can only be done if there are some Christians who remain in those bad cities and try to be salt and light in those communities. So I don't see it as a either or. I think it can be a both.
I don't think we need to move into the country at all. I think there's enough Christians across London. It's just about us rediscovering being the people of God, rediscovering that solidarity with the martyrs and the confessors, and having that spirituality of martyrdom. So there's a radicalness to our faith, and then getting to know the Christians in our local geographical area, and living life on life with the Christians in our local geographical area, while still tapping into whatever our church is doing on a Sunday and the other meeting that they have midweek, or the other prayer meeting that they have midweek. Because from a sociological point of view, our churches work like clubs. Do you know what I'm saying? So these two things are not incompatible. So there's a group that I researched here in London, based in Acton, called the Antioch Community, and that's exactly what they do. They're Christians that have moved into Acton. They each go to their own different churches, so and they're made up of Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox. They all go to their own churches, but they live their lives together. They live together, they work together, they support one another, they help one another, they do mission together. And if they can do it in Acton as one network, why can't we replicate that everywhere? And then as that replicates, Christians will then be able to go, well, actually, we're all going to vote for this guy, not for that guy, because this guy's pro-Christian, that guy isn't. And that might get that MP in, or that councillor in, and we're going to send our kids to this school, and we're going to get on that school governing board, and then we're influencing the school governing board. Do you see how it works? Once you colonize an area, you colonize its politics, its economics, and its socio-cultural matrix. It can work against us, but it can also work for us. And so far, it has been working against us. Well, it's time we started making it work for us as well.
Yeah. One thing I'd been brought to my attention by someone who you know in real life, Bob, because, we're meeting up against on Sunday, but he suggested that in terms of evangelizing, in terms of trying to, evangelize the English peoples, maybe we shouldn't be just starting with the kind of the general liberal populace. Maybe we should be starting with the more right-wing minded nationalist individuals, because they're, first of all, they're going to be more inclined to become Christian. significantly easier. It's going to be significantly easier to convert them. But they also have the right mindset coming, pretty much almost already there. Just need some tweaks. It just needs some Christian tweaks. Priorities. God, church, church, God, family, then state. So that I don't know what you think about that, but
I totally agree. There's a harvest waiting for the church. But the church, particularly the Anglican Church, is so timid about doing mission to the right wing, because in our cultural milieu, there's various degrees of left wing. But in our discussion about politics, there's various degrees of left wing, and then there's only alt right. You're only alt extreme right if you're not left wing, and that's the way that lots of people talk about politics. So the church is very hesitant. I wouldn't say they need tweaking. Everyone needs profound conversion, and everyone's profound conversion is a continuous metanoia. It's a continuous repentance of mind. But it will certainly be easier to convert conservatives and nationalists.
When I say tweaking, just to clarify it, I mean in the sense of in terms of pragmatic goals or pragmatic kind of getting to things done. There doesn't need to be as profound of a change in that sense compared to, say, if I were to, convince a liberal, maybe the church is true and something like that.
I know a whole bunch of conservatives who've become Christians at the corner in the 4 years that I've been there.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't do the big Allahu Akbar moment at the corner like the Muslims do.
Maybe you should.
But I guarantee there are people becoming Christians at the corner.
Yeah, I think people on the right are kind of more kind of naturally inclined to at this point because they're seeing where society is going and they're like, I don't want this. And
yeah. And the thing is, they will bring in the muscle that the church has lost.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Like, I don't know how much you guys know about the chivalric code, but the chivalric code of medieval France and then medieval Europe turned warriors into gentlemen. Well, you can use that same code to turn gentlemen into warriors, and we need more warriors in the church.
So, Kyrie eleison, Jesus is Lord. Again, a currency I don't know. I think it's like some Scandinavian. 100. Thank you, Eugen. £20. Thank you so much. It's really kind of you. He says the West will collapse in on itself, as is always the case when society turns away from God. So when it does and havoc ensues, the masses will look to our thriving, self-sufficient Christian communities and want to return to God.
Can I reply to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because there is something that I've noticed amongst both lots of Christians and lots of conservatives, and it's almost like they throw their hands up and they almost prophesy defeat. Well, you're not going to win with that attitude. You don't win by declaring that we're going to lose and assuming that it's already lost. Like, all of this can be turned around if we Christians have the imagination, the determination, and the organization to push back in all the directions we need to push back in. That we're not beaten. There's millions of Christians. And we're actually quite wealthy, quite rich, and quite well positioned in society. But we lack a vision, we lack a unity, we lack a spirituality that's required to influence society, because we lack confidence that actually, you know what, following Christ is the right direction our society should be going in. And I think too many conservatives, too many people on the right generally either look for compromise, they look for, well, you have your space and I'll have my space. Let's live together. They look for a compromise, or they prophesy their own defeat. And that is those two attitudes are both going to guarantee you lose. We should want to conquer and we should want to win. And we should believe that we can. Because we can. We really can.
What are you saying, Ben?
Yeah, I agree. I think if you start with that attitude that we're going to lose, then you are going to lose. I'm not saying be overly optimistic, but you need to have that confidence in the church that it's not just going to fail and lose miserably and everything's going to go down the pan. If you start with that attitude, then you're off to the wrong foot to begin with. That's what I would say. So, yeah, I'm in full agreement. I think it's the wrong attitude.
Eugen again, £10. Thanks again, mate. Why do you think the Mormons, Falun Gong, and Ahmadiyya Muslims has been so successful at converting people? Have you examined their methods? What can we learn from them? So I'd like to say something first. So if you, and this is something that will lead in for Bob to talk to you, because I've spoken to Bob about this before, but I wouldn't even say Ahmadiyya Muslims. I don't think Muslims are really converting that many people. And I also don't think that of those people they do convert, many of them are being retained. So that's what I'll say. However, why do they convert? Why do people convert? And this was a thing that kind of hit me if you look at my Christian Visits a Mosque video. I don't know if you've ever visited a mosque, Ben, but I know Bob has. So he knows that when you walk in there, it's a very kind of cozy atmosphere. And the message is very simple. It's just believe in one God, give charity, avoid alcohol. It seems like a healthy lifestyle. You have the wudu stands and all that. It seems like a very clean lifestyle. It seems like, a very wholesome lifestyle. Plus, it's very simple. It's just believe in one God. And everyone in the mosque is very, very, very friendly to you. And so that makes you kind of feel at home, feel as part of a community when before you didn't. So, that I think, other than just evangelism simpliciter, which is just like telling people what the truth propositions are and kind of convincing people and that kind of thing, but also the feeling, the emotional kind of effect that the religion has on you is extremely important. Actually, perhaps even more as much, but perhaps I dare say even more important than the evangelism, simply speaking, and just telling the truth propositions to normal people. We're in like the world of apologetics online, where everyone's kind of maybe slightly autistic and very interested in debates and arguments and that kind of stuff. But that's not what normal people are like. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think if, as you said, in fact, we see this at Speaker's Corner. I'm sure you have too, Bob. Is that they often, when you see this supposedly huge number of converts to Islam, they say it's the fastest growing religion in the world, mainly due to birth rates, if we're being honest. Do they have converts? Yes, they do. But as you said, it's mainly because they see this easy religion. It sounds very fluffy. It's very nice. They portray their prophet as this fantastic man, this massive feminist who just was good for everyone, basically. So when they hear this kind of view, they tend to adopt it. But then, as you said, they don't tend to stay there because it starts off very easy, very simplistic. But when the longer they remain in Islam, the more problems and obstacles and hurdles they come across, and the more issues they see within Islam itself. In fact, I have a friend, a personal friend, Bob, you know him too. He was a Muslim. He became a Muslim from one of the groups at Speaker's Corner. He had this exact experience. It sounds very easy, sounds very good, sounds very simplistic. But when the longer he spent in Islam, I think it was around 3 or so years, the more issues he came across in terms of its theology, its practice, morality, things like this. And after experiencing this, he was one of those people that abandoned ship. He jumped ship and he became a Christian. And thank God now he comes to Speaker's Corner. And when he's there, he helps us evangelize. He holds cameras. He's very helpful. So you are right. There is that simplistic way. But then when they get into it, they see that's not the case. In terms of Mormonism, I don't have much experience with Mormons and how they evangelize, mainly because the majority of them are over in the States. We do have Muslims. We do have Mormons here, but they're not exactly in the majority. We very rarely meet them. In fact, at Speaker's Corner, I've only ever seen Mormons there once, actually, only one time. And that's the only time I've ever spoke to a Mormon at Speaker's Corner because they're just not there. In terms of Ahmadiyyas, I'm not too sure how they evangelize. Again, I've never actually debated an Ahmadiyya.
So the Ahmadiyya are the only sect of Islam that have laid down the concept of jihad, and they don't believe in using violence. And ironically, that was sufficient to get them persecuted by every other group of Muslims violently. And so, say a prayer for the Ahmadiyya because they suffer a lot. But the reality is that Evangelism works. I know, I'm doing it, and I've seen people become Christian. I've seen a good number of people become Christian through the work that I do. But I'm doing it, committedly, intelligently. I know that other seriously committed, intelligent evangelists at the corner equally have made converts themselves. There's one particular Turkish tiger that I could mention, and I know she's brought people to Christ. So there's a number of intelligent evangelists doing really good work, but we're just so few in number. And the reality is that the church doesn't have a culture of evangelism, but Muslims do have a culture of they do have a culture of witnessing to their religion that goes from top to bottom. But the other thing about that is that when you're surrounded by Muslims all the time, because you're living in Birmingham or in Bradford, and that dominates the shops that you go to, the schools that you go to, the way that people dress, the noises that you see, the festivals that you hear being celebrated and talked about, in that context, it's easier to make converts, and they do. It's true that Muslims over-exaggerate how many people become Muslim all the time. That's a fact. It is the evidence show that it is by birth rate. If we're just going off conversions, then Christianity is the fastest growing religion. And if we're just going off conversions, Pentecostalism is the fastest growing form of Christianity. If we're going just off conversions, but we're not. Christianity is still a growing religion globally, but it's keeping track with the global birth rate. So as a proportion, whereas Islam is going through a population explosion, as well as the fact that they're making converts. I give it one of the reasons, one of the big conversion draws to Islam is single women that convert because they marry a Muslim. And one of the reasons why so many women marry Muslims and then convert is because they're English women in a culture that is hedonistic, sexual, and doesn't believe in marriage. Women at some point naturally want to have families. And in cities like Bradford and Birmingham, there's plenty of Muslims that also want to have families and like the idea of converting someone. And it's a synergy made in heaven for them. And so that's why you have a large number of female converts to Islam, because the English pagans, we are not English, the English pagans have given up on the family, and Christian men, too many of them, are cooks and soy boys who are terrified of women and don't want to date and don't want to marry and don't know how to talk to girls and don't make the first move. We've got to rediscover the chivalric code, basically, and get some testosterone back into the church. But we are making converts amongst Islam. I've never met so many converts. Lewis, like you and I both know there are converts. Ben, you and I both know there are converts. We're quite comfortable in the fact that we know that the Muslims are becoming Christians. That's why when the Muslims say no one ever becomes a Christian, I always smile and laugh. I love when Muslims tell me that no one ever becomes a Christian, because they make my job easy.
And that's the problem as well. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, while ever they're denying it, it just means that it's easier for it to happen.
And this is the thing as well. I think because we see this common thing that, well, Islam's the fastest growing religion, it's almost as if some Christians have just accepted the fact we're not making converts, when in reality there are a number of, take this for example. In the space of 1 month, I had 3 Muslims approach me at Speaker's Corner, all telling me that because of debates they've seen online from various different Christians, they are now no longer Muslim, but they're Christian. The difference is the Muslims howl them up as this trophy. Look what we've got. We've got a convert. Look how good we are. Look how holy we are. And they tout them as this kind of trophy. Whereas we don't do that. We're more interested in discipling these people, pointing them to a good church.
We also can't do that, because if we did, they would be in serious trouble.
Exactly. And that's another thing.
Converts to Orthodoxy, a few Muslim converts to Orthodoxy with me in my youth group. It's rough. It's rough.
In fact, it's funny you say that, because like I said, there are 3 Muslims who approached me and said they're now Christian. There is one ex-Muslim who's a Kurdish ex-Muslim, at Speaker's Corner. Bob, you know him. I won't say his name, but you do know him. And he was a Muslim. He became a Christian. And when they found out he became a Christian, he was actually assaulted. And it's online. You can find this video. He was assaulted online at Speaker's Corner simply because he referenced he was an ex-Muslim. He now no longer accepts Muhammad, and he now accepts Jesus Christ, and he's a Christian. He was shoved off of a stepladder. He was standing on some kind of stepladder. He was shoved off. So there is that reason. We don't go touting them, number one, because they're not trophies to be touted. They're human beings who need to be discipled. And secondly, for their own safety. Whereas Islam, it's all about, well, look how many converts we've made. Look how many people we've got to say the magic words. And it's ridiculous.
But there's something that we need to recognize as Christians, which is the more people hear something, the more they believe it. And when you believe something, it affects the way you behave. So, and the Muslims are much better at this than Christians. They are much better at saying Islam is the fastest growing religion. Islam is the fastest growing religion. It doesn't matter whether it's true. But if people believe it, they start to behave differently. And both people who are seeking religion and both Christians who are dealing with religion or dealing with Islam. Yeah. Hitler said, if you're going to tell a lie, tell a big one, because no one will believe that someone could make such an outrageous lie. He wrote that in Mein Kampf. And Islam Taoists take that maxim to the max. They tell outrageous lies, and they tell it often enough, it becomes the truth. And then people start modulating their behavior because they believe it to be true. When all of the evidence points to the fact that Christianity is still a growing religion, Islam is the fastest growing religion, but it's the fastest growing religion because of a birth rate. So and there's lessons in that for Christians to learn. Like, one, we should, where it's safe to do so and where the other person wants to be part of this, bring our converts forward. The Orthodox Church in America is doing a great job of that. They've got this sort of steady stream of witnesses of people going, yes, I've become Orthodox. Yes, I've become Orthodox, or this is my journey into Orthodoxy. And the American church, the Orthodox Church in America is doing that really well. And that's something we Christians need to get back. We need to get back people saying, yeah, I've completed my journey to Christianity and to becoming a Christian, and this is my story. And there was something that I wanted to say again, which is, you talked about the simple message in Islam. Well, there's a simple message that every Christian can speak. It's not complicated. The simple question that every Christian can ask, which is not complicated, which is, what do you think about Jesus, and do you want to be his student? Do you want to be his disciple? To put it in modern, airy-fairy kind of language of our culture, do you want, Jesus to be a guru? Do you get people to fall in love with Jesus and to want to be his student, to want to be his disciple, and have confidence that the more they draw close to Jesus, the more they will embrace the truth. We don't need to overcomplicate the Christian message. And that is the simple message that I invite people to, and it's one that people can grasp. And as they get, go on.
Yeah, I think someone else said this in the chat, that we need Islam has a very simple sales pitch, but perhaps Catholicism and Orthodoxy, particularly the sales pitch, isn't perhaps so simple. Perhaps we need to, and that's what I've been thinking about is, how to make it simple in a sense, but that's something I'm working on, and I'm thinking of tailoring it towards those right-wing individuals I was talking about. Yeah, you were going to say, Ben?
Disciple of Jesus. That's the simple message of the Christian faith.
Yeah, I think start off with the simplistic message of Christianity, and all of the more complicated things that can come later. I think you're right. We can sometimes throw all of this kind of high lofty language, the high kind of arguments, and it kind of leaves people like, wow, what in the world are you even saying? When if we start off simple, that stuff will come. It doesn't mean that stuff doesn't have a place. It will come, but the simple stuff must come first, because we can't expect everyone to understand the deeper things of the faith We can't give them meat before we give them milk, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So Kyrie eleison, Jesus is Lord. Again, I don't know what that currency is, but 50 of it. We need alliances, but we can't be ecumenists as Orthodox. So what should we do? Roman Catholics, Protestants are family, but how should we unite them to Orthodoxy, Ben and Bob? Well, I'll take this one. So Ben and Bob aren't Orthodox. So Bob isn't, I said this at the beginning of the stream, Bob isn't Orthodox and Ben is Roman Catholic. So to answer your question, Kyrie eleison, I would strongly suggest you look into Metropolitan Hilarion Alfeyev, for all the faults people point out in him. He's talked about a tactical alliance between Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism in order to preserve the core kind of Christian traditional values. And I think this is true. And I don't think we need to put ourselves under any kind of Roman Catholic authority or agree with them on doctrines. And I don't think it needs to go either way. Obviously, I don't know what Ben thinks about the Pope, but I think as a political entity, there's huge problems in terms of what we're talking about accomplishing here. But that to the side, the point is that, like I said earlier, we need to form those communities, like Bob said, and then you can have like a weak interconnection between those communities, in the sense that it's like the state is doing something that is fundamentally anti-Christian, or there's this thing going on here that's fundamentally anti-Christian. You and me, as in you Catholics and we Orthodox, or you Protestants and we Orthodox, we are going to oppose that. And we are going to work together in a tactical sense to oppose that, because it's for just fundamentally anti, even just the most fundamental things we believe in, Skittles being one of them. So that's what I'd say to you, Kyrie eleison. We don't need to be ecumenists. We don't need to be ecumenists, but we can still do what needs to be done pragmatically in this sense. It just takes some diplomacy. It just takes someone to be. It just takes people to agree to be diplomatic. That's all it takes, really. Honestly, it's not even that complicated.
And I would stress that it's not just about opposing. If you just fight in terms of opposition, you lose. If all you do is resist, that's the mistake that the conservatives have made right across the world, is that they have accepted that their sole role is to be the pause button on an otherwise progressive agenda. You can't win just by opposing. You have to win by loving the thing that you stand for so much that it crowds out everything else. And I don't care whether it's the Protestants, the Catholics, or the Orthodox that wins. Like, love your Orthodox Church to the fullest. Love the Roman Catholic Church to the fullest. Love your Calvinist Presbyterian Church to the fullest. But love it so much that it crowds out progressivism, that it crowds out, Islam, that it crowds out secularism, that it crowds out, and then after that, I don't care. so long as it's the church in one form or another, or all of us together that win. But it's got about being for something, not just being against something. If you're just against something, then all you are is a pause button. You've got to be for something, which means you've got to come forward with your agenda, come forward with your vision, come forward with your narrative.
Yeah. Eugen, £10. What do you think of distributism as an alternative to the false dichotomy of capitalism, socialism? And do you think a return to absolute monarchy and guild system is necessary to rebuild a Christian West?
I think that all of that is far, far, far too way into the future. You can only have those kind of conversations when there is a density of population enough that could even be a topic. We're not even close to having that kind of conversation.
Yeah, I don't think that's realistic right now.
Yeah, I'm in agreement 100%. I mean, I think like those are ideals, but it's like
that's maybe something to look forward to, but it's not something that's going to happen like tomorrow. It's just, we need to be realistic.
And obviously that would be something that, I mean, it's not even worth talking about because it's so far. It's kind of like saying, so it's kind of like it's like building the Empire State. It's like we're building the Empire State Building and you haven't even built a single brick. And then you're like, what kind of decorations should we have on floor 105? It's like, it's just so beyond any kind of thing. So yeah, first things first. Friendworld £2 says, will you have Father Spiridon Bailey on the show? I'd love to have Father Spiridon on. I don't know if he has a laptop or anything. I think he might only use a phone. Last time I spoke to him, but that was a while back. He might have changed now, but I'd be open to having Father Spiridon on. And I've spoken to him on the phone before, so that could happen. I just need to have a good excuse to do so. Here's another one, Friend World. What's stopping Bob and Ben from taking the ortho pill? So yeah.
Is that a question you want us to answer?
I mean, not really, but seeing as he spent £2, you may as well.
I'll only take the ortho pill or the Catholic pill if I marry an ortho wife or a Catholic wife.
I can introduce you to a nice Catholic lady, Bob, if that would help. Well, I think the answer is quite obvious. I'm not fully persuaded that Orthodoxy is the church that I should be in. To put it in the simplistic form, obviously I could go deeper into my reasons in terms of epistemology, church history, etc., but I'll leave it as simple as I can for the sake of this ecumenical gathering.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So it looks like we don't have anything else that I can see. Let me just double check so I don't miss anyone. But how have you guys felt the discussion has gone so far?
I've enjoyed it. Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it as well. I think that I think it's great to see young people, because I imagine that there's a lot of young people also listening in on this as well, are actually having the kind of conversations that our parents and our grandparents should have had and didn't have. Because our parents and our grandparents, which were the after the war generation, were easily the worst two generations in history. So, and like the disaster that they have handed to us at every level, that our generation now have to fix. And that includes within the church as well, despite that there were great souls in the past, but even the previous two generations of Christians were pretty useless. And we now have to pick up the pieces of the fight that they didn't fight. And so we've got a much tougher fight to fight. And it's great that there are people having the right kind of conversations, asking the right kind of questions, thinking about the right kind of issues to start to begin to turn centuries worth of neglect and damage around. So I was very happy to talk with you guys.
Yeah, 75% of my audience is under 34, apparently. So
nice.
I've noticed with family and friends, Luthien the Mortal, $5. Thank you. I've noticed with family and friends, they're very interested in when you describe the eschatology differences in our view of heaven and hell. Well, thank you very much. So yeah, I think we'll call it there. It's been a real pleasure having you both on. Please go check out their channels. Go check out, they've got lots, just like practical, very clear case study instances of debating Muslims. So if you want to see what it's like, you can just binge that stuff. I know I have. So yeah, thank you both for coming on.
Shall I close with a prayer?
Yeah, of course.
Closing an Orthodox prayer for the occasion. Yeah. O Christ our God, who at all times and in every hour, in heaven and on earth, are worshipped and glorified, who are long-suffering, merciful and compassionate, who love the just and show mercy upon the sinner, who call all to salvation through the promise of blessings to come. O Lord, in this hour receive our supplications and direct our lives according to your commandments. Sanctify our souls, hallow our bodies, correct our thoughts, cleanse our minds. Deliver us from all tribulation, evil and distress. Encompass us with your holy angels that, guided and guarded by them, we may attain to the unity of the faith and to the knowledge of your unapproachable glory. For you are blessed unto the ages of ages. Amen.
Amen. Great. Have a wonderful night, you guys, and have a wonderful day wherever everyone else is.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Good night. Peace with you guys.